that unfolded. But let me defend the characterization of this as at least initiated. I personally blame public health. Public health authorities, the top public health authorities in the world and the top public health authorities in the United States and elsewhere, for the set of events that transpired in response.
And let's name some names on that front.
Yeah, so like in the United States, a primary architect of the lockdown strategy was Tony Fauci. Now, let me just describe why I think it's not a conspiracy in a sense that, there's this like small group that has nefarious ideas. If you look at the decades before the pandemic happened, there was a concerted effort in the United States and elsewhere to prepare for the next pandemic. That preparation involved putting into actuality a whole range of powers that previously we would have said were not consistent with liberal democracy. Powers to close you into your home, to close your business, to close your schools. Powers to basically force you to test and isolate if you're found positive. A whole range of almost, dictatorial powers that would have been previously unimaginable. And the idea was that we are biohazards to each other. And the whole goal is, if we can keep each other apart during a time of severe infectious disease threat, it will actually save lives. Mm-hmm. That was the premise of this, and that there was coming a new respiratory virus pandemic threat. Now that was certain to be true. Mm-hmm. We've had respiratory virus pandemics time after time, decade after decade. In the 20th century, we had respiratory virus pandemics. 1918, of course, now is the most famous, but we had them in 1957, 1968, 1976. You could just keep going on and on. Most recently, maybe 2009 and the swine flu pandemic. So there was this infrastructure set up and this sort of ideology among the top scientific bureaucrats in this country and elsewhere that because a respiratory virus pandemic was coming, we needed better tools than we previously had to address it. And for them, the better tools meant essentially the dictatorial powers, the authoritarian powers that constitute a lockdown. Mm-hmm. Now, when COVID arrived, and we can talk about what exactly how it arrived, but let's just take that as a given that it arrived. That entire infrastructure sort of powered into existence, and part of that infrastructure involves making sure that the people take the measures that are being proposed seriously, that the threat seriously. And the way they did that is by spreading panic and fear about the disease. In that environment, what happened was that a small group of people at the head, like Tony, let's just name names, Tony Fauci, he donned on himself the mantle of science itself, right? We're all looking for a guru.
He took the name of science in vain.
He actually did. I mean, he talks about it as if it's some sort of religious system. Mm-hmm. So he took, and what he did is he designed a set of policies, an ethos that said, if you do these things, then I will rescue you from the threat that is going all around you, that's in the air everywhere, where even your children are a biohazard to you, a threat to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in that, so when that set of events unfolds, like you have someone who essentially takes over what truth is in the minds of everybody. Then all these other actors could come in and start to say, you mentioned the pharmaceutical companies. They jumped in, I don't think they were in a nefarious plot. I think that they jumped in legitimately saying, okay, let's help figure out how to address this threat. Yeah. Now then they took advantage of the power they had in very abusive ways, but that's a later development rather than the driving force, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you understand the practicalities of the relationship between the top public health bureaucrats and the pharmaceutical companies? Because there's obviously moral hazard there. One of the things that struck me is really beyond comprehension in some fundamental sense is that the Biden White House, for example, is essentially is acting as a shill for Pfizer constantly. The Biden White House tweets out around Christmas, for example, this became particularly egregious, these constant reminders that if you loved your children, you'd go have them both vaccinated and boosted. And by that time, it was absolutely clear to me, and I'd be more than happy to be corrected on this front, that the evidence that vaccinating children was a good idea was not only lacking, it was the best evidence was counter evidence, is that children were basically at zero risk for serious consequences, serious side effects from COVID. And the vaccines, in all likelihood, posed a greater threat to them than did the virus. And so I couldn't understand at all why the White House would be supporting the marketing efforts of the pharmaceutical companies. Now, there are tens of billions of dollars at stake here, and there is a revolving door. And people who are listening and watching, is my understanding is that there's something of a revolving door in Washington between powerful companies and the regulators who regulate them. Those regulatory bureaucratic positions aren't necessarily particularly well paid, and they don't last forever. And a lot of the people who occupy those positions are ambitious, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But it's pretty damn useful to hire someone to work for you who was once involved in the regulation of your company, let's say. So there's plenty of moral hazard on that front. How do you understand the interplay, like the dynamic interplay between the public health officials, quote, who are there to protect us, and these entities operating behind the scenes who, do make products that are useful, but also have an iron in the fire that isn't necessarily completely aligned with everyone's best interests?
Companies aren't just selling products anymore. They're selling you. We're talking about how these tech companies enrich themselves by taking your personal data. They grab your web history, email metadata, and video searches to create a detailed profile on you and then sell that off to the highest bidder. When you go online without a VPN, internet service providers, or ISPs can see every single website you visit. They can legally sell this information without your consent to ad companies and tech giants who then use it to target you. When you use ExpressVPN, your identity is anonymized by a secure VPN server, so ISPs cannot see your online activity. Your data is also encrypted for maximum protection. ExpressVPN is incredibly easy to use. Just fire up the app and click one button. Plus, it works on all devices, so you can stay secure on the go. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/Jordan. That's EXPRESSVPN.com/Jordan. And get 3 extra months free.